They say time heals all wounds. But what about the wounds no one else can see? The kind that don't bleed, that leave no visible scar, yet change the way you breathe, the way you love, the way you trust. These are the wounds left behind by narcissistic abuse, invisible fractures of the soul that the empath carries like a shadow, following them into every room, every relationship, every quiet moment of solitude. On the surface, life looks normal. Smiles return. Routines continue. Conversations flow. But beneath the surface, there is an echo, a silent ache, like a bruise that never quite fades. Because when you've been entangled with a narcissist, healing isn't as simple as moving on. The body may recover. The mind may even learn to function again. But the heart remembers. Their heart remembers. It remembers the manipulation dressed as love. It remembers the gaslighting, the way reality itself was twisted until you doubted your own reflection. It remembers the charm that drew you in, only to become a cage you could not escape. Full. And so, the empath walks through life carrying an invisible burden. Friends may say, "But you look fine now." Family may insist, "It's in the past, let it go." Yet deep down, the scars remain. Scars etched into the psyche, shaping how you see yourself, how you trust others, how you move through the world. Carl Jung once said that what we do not bring to consciousness, we meet as fate. These hidden wounds, if left unacknowledged, become the silent architects of our future. They whisper in the background, guiding choices, sabotaging hope, keeping us trapped in cycles we cannot name. This is why the scars of narcissistic abuse are unlike any other. They do not simply heal with time. They require confrontation. They demand awareness. They call us to look inward, to face the shadows we've inherited from pain, and to reclaim the parts of ourselves that were stolen. And it is here, in this hidden battlefield of the soul, that Jung's insights become a lantern. Because only by illuminating the darkness can the empath begin to transform, not by erasing the scars, but by turning them into a source of strength. At first, it never looks like abuse. It looks like love. The empath meets the narcissist, and it feels as if destiny itself has orchestrated the meeting. They are showered with affection, praise, and admiration. The narcissist studies them carefully, mirroring their dreams, their values, their deepest desires. This is the stage of idealization, the golden period when every word feels like poetry, every touch feels electric, and the empath believes they have finally found someone who truly sees them. But what is really happening is far darker. The narcissist is not admiring the empath. They are dissecting them. Every strength, every weakness, every hidden insecurity becomes data to be used later. The empath, unaware, surrenders more and more of themselves, mistaking surveillance for intimacy. Then the shift begins. Subtle at first, a criticism disguised as concern, a sarcastic remark hidden under the mask of humor. Slowly, the balance tilts. The admiration fades, replaced by manipulation. The narcissist pulls invisible strings, testing control. And when the empath resists, the gaslighting begins. Gaslighting is not simply lying. It is an attack on reality itself. The empath hears, "That never happened. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive." Over time, they begin to question not just the relationship, but their very perception of truth. Reality bends, confidence fractures, and identity itself begins to erode. This is the collapse. The moment when the empath no longer recognizes themselves. Once vibrant, they now feel drained, hollowed out, reduced to a shadow of who they were. Friends may notice the change, but they cannot see the silent war raging inside. To the empath, it feels like annihilation. Yet here lies the paradox. What feels like destruction is also initiation. The narcissistic cycle, as brutal as it is, forces the empath to confront aspects of themselves they might never have faced otherwise. The dependency, the need for external validation, the silent wounds from the past that left them vulnerable to manipulation. All of it is brought to the surface in painful clarity. Carl Jung believed that the psyche speaks to us through suffering, that the shadow, those hidden, repressed parts of ourselves, emerges in the moments we least want to face it. Narcissistic abuse, then, becomes a dark initiation. It is a descent into the underworld of the self, where illusions shatter and truth cannot be ignored. The empath who survives this descent is no longer the same. They have been broken open, yes, but in that breaking, they have been given a chance to rebuild. Jung would say that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires this confrontation with darkness. Without it, the empath would remain incomplete, bound by unconscious wounds. What begins as a story of love and betrayal becomes, through the lens of Jung, a story of transformation. The empath is not merely a victim. They are an initiate called to face the shadows, to reclaim their identity, and to rise from collapse with a deeper, stronger sense of self. When Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, he wasn't describing something distant or abstract. He was describing the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or hide. The aspects of our personality we would rather pretend do not exist. To Jung, the shadow was not evil in itself, but dangerous because it remained unconscious. What we refuse to face in ourselves will eventually control us, whether we admit it or not. For the empath entangled with a narcissist, this truth becomes painfully real. In the beginning, they believe they are only encountering the narcissist's darkness, the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty disguised as charm. But as the cycle unfolds, something deeper is revealed. The empath is not only battling the narcissist, they are being forced to confront their own shadow. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Narcissistic abuse becomes the crucible for this process. Under every gaslit conversation, every twisted reality, every silent night of doubt pulls the empath closer to the uncomfortable recognition of what they have ignored within themselves. Their fear of abandonment, their hunger for validation, their tendency to lose themselves in the service of others. 3. This confrontation is brutal. To admit that vulnerability and need made them susceptible feels like betrayal of the self. Yet Jung's wisdom reminds us the shadow must be integrated, not denied. Healing does not come from pretending strength, but from acknowledging weakness. So, it is in this acknowledgement that transformation begins. The empath learns that the narcissist is not only a destroyer, but also an unwilling teacher. By pushing the empath to the edge of collapse, they expose what was buried. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. It is not about becoming perfect, but about uniting the conscious and unconscious, the light and the shadow, into one integrated self. For the empath, individuation begins with the recognition that they are more than just the victim. Yes, they were manipulated, gaslit, and broken down, but within that breaking lies the possibility of awakening. Here, by facing the parts of themselves they once disowned, they gain a new kind of power, the power to see clearly, to stand firmly, and to no longer be seduced by illusions. In Jung's framework, the descent into darkness is never meaningless. It is the necessary passage. And for the empath, narcissistic abuse, as devastating as it feels, becomes the very doorway to individuation, the path where shadow is confronted and wholeness is forged. There comes a moment in every survivor's journey when the world outside looks the same. But the world inside feels like it has shattered beyond repair. This is the descent Jung spoke of, the crossing into shadow, the mythological underworld, where the self is stripped bare and forced to confront what has been hidden for too long. For the empath, this descent begins quietly. It is not an explosion, but a collapse. Alone at night, they begin to feel the weight of everything they tried to outrun. Fear arrives first, a fear that maybe they will never escape, never heal, never trust again. Fear that the narcissist has permanently broken them, leaving behind only fragments of who they once were. But fear does not travel alone. With it comes rage. Rage at the narcissist, yes, but also at themselves. Rage for allowing it to happen, for ignoring the red flags, for giving so much of themselves away. This anger burns hot, threatening to consume, and yet beneath it is another layer. Shame. Shame whispers cruelly, "You were weak. You let this happen. You are unworthy of love." Shame is perhaps the heaviest companion because it does not shout. It seeps silently into every thought, every memory, until the empath begins to believe that maybe the narcissist was right all along. And then, in the shadows, something even more unsettling emerges. Suppressed desires. The need to be seen, the hunger for recognition, the longing to feel powerful rather than powerless. These were parts of the self long buried, denied in favor of being the caretaker, the healer, the one who always gives. Now, exposed by suffering, these desires demand to be acknowledged. This is the darkest part of the journey. It feels like breaking. The empath feels torn between who they thought they were, the selfless giver, the one who loved unconditionally, and who they are now discovering themselves to be. Someone carrying rage, shame, and a deep hunger for validation. The descent strips away illusions, leaving only raw truth. Jung understood this stage well. He believed that myths of descent into the underworld, from Persephone's abduction to Orpheus's tragic journey, were reflections of the psyche's own initiation. Transformation always requires a death of some kind, a symbolic destruction of the old self, so the new can be born. The empath, in their private suffering, is living out this myth in real time. It is terrifying. It feels endless, but it is not without meaning. Jung would say that only by facing these disowned parts, the fear, the rage, the shame, the buried desires, can the individual move toward wholeness. To deny them is to remain enslaved. To meet them is to reclaim power. The empath, in this darkest chamber of the soul, is not failing. They are being initiated. What feels like collapse is, in truth, the necessary threshold before transformation. There is a moment in the empath's journey when clinging becomes impossible. The illusions that once held the relationship together finally unravel, strand by strand, until there is nothing left to grasp. This is not simply heartbreak. It is a dissolution of the very self that once believed it could endure anything for love. The first illusion to fall is the belief that they could fix the narcissist. For so long, the empath's love was a mission, a sacrifice, a constant pouring of energy into a bottomless well. They mistook endurance for virtue, believing that patience could heal cruelty, that loyalty could redeem betrayal. But the truth arrives with devastating clarity. No amount of love can fill a void that was never theirs to mend. The second illusion is harder still, the belief that love must mean sacrifice. This idea had lived in the empath's heart long before the narcissist appeared. To love was to give endlessly, to abandon self for the sake of another. The narcissist exploited this belief until the empath's very identity was woven from threads of martyrdom. And yet, in the silence after collapse, the empath sees the truth. Love that requires self-erasure is not love at all. It is bondage. And then comes the most painful disintegration of all, the death of the false self. This self was carefully constructed through years of abuse, a mask shaped by manipulation, molded by gaslighting, cemented by shame, cemented by shame. It is the self that learned to stay quiet, to doubt its own instincts, to exist only in relation to the narcissist's moods. To shed this false identity feels like tearing away skin. But it is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the beginning. Jung called this stage ego death, the breaking apart of the old self so something truer, deeper, and more whole can emerge. To the ego, this feels like annihilation. To the soul, it is liberation, because the self that dies is the one built on lies, illusions, and dependency. The self that rises is the one that remembers its original wholeness. The empath, stripped of illusions, stands in a kind of spiritual nakedness. Nothing feels certain. Everything feels lost. And yet in this loss, a quiet space opens, a space where rebirth can take root. Jung would say that this is not destruction, but initiation. The death of the old identity is the doorway through which individuation begins. The empath does not yet know what they will become. But in surrendering the illusions that once defined them, they have made room for truth. And in that space of surrender, transformation begins to stir. Rebirth does not happen in a single moment. It arrives slowly, like dawn breaking after the longest night. At first, there is only faint light on the horizon, fragile and uncertain. But gradually, something shifts. The empath, once shattered, begins to feel the stirrings of a self they thought was lost forever. This is the stage of integration. The descent into shadow has revealed truths too powerful to ignore, and now those truths must be woven into a new way of being. The empath begins with boundaries, once unthinkable, now non-negotiable. Where they once said yes to everything, they now learn to say no without apology. Where they once allowed others to define their worth, they begin to define it themselves. These boundaries are not walls. They are the shape of their newfound strength. Then comes the embrace of the shadow. The empath has met their fear, rage, shame, and suppressed desires, and rather than exiling them, they begin to accept them as part of the whole. Rage becomes fuel for clarity. Fear becomes a compass, pointing to what matters most. Shame, once a silencer, transforms into humility, reminding them of their resilience. Even their hidden desires find a place, no longer denied, but acknowledged as natural expressions of being human. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole by reconciling the opposites within us. Light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and anger, all are given a seat at the table. The empath no longer strives to be only a good, only a giving. They recognize that wholeness is not purity, it is balance. Most importantly, they no longer define themselves through the narcissist's gaze. Where once they sought validation in every glance, every word, every fleeting approval, now they stand rooted in their own worth. Their identity is no longer built on sacrifice but on authenticity. They discover that love does not mean losing oneself, but rather standing fully as oneself in the presence of another. This transformation is not loud or dramatic. It is steady, like the growth of deep roots beneath the soil. Friends may notice the change, the way the empath carries themselves differently, the quiet confidence that replaces old patterns of self-doubt. But the true transformation is internal. The empath feels it in the way they breathe, the way they listen to their own instincts, the way they choose peace over chaos. Jung believed that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the empath, this privilege is finally within reach. What began as devastation has become initiation. What looked like ruin has become rebirth. They rise not as who they were before the abuse, but as someone new, someone stronger, more integrated, more whole. The empath has walked through the underworld, faced the shadow, and returned carrying the fire of transformation. And from that fire, a new self is born. Every myth of descent ends with a return. But the one who returns is never the same as the one who began the journey. The empath, once shattered by betrayal, now rises carrying something far greater than survival, wisdom forged in fire. Jung called this the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who has been broken, scarred, and remade, and who now holds within them the medicine born of suffering. Unlike the teacher who speaks from books, or the guide who offers theory, the wounded healer leads from lived pain. Their authority does not come from perfection, but from endurance. The empath has walked through fear, rage, shame, and illusion. They have faced the death of the false self and discovered the strength of the integrated self. And now, standing on the other side of individuation, they are no longer only survivors of narcissistic abuse. They are witnesses, living proof that the human spirit can descend into darkness and emerge transformed. The scars remain, yes, they do not vanish, but they no longer bleed. Instead, they shine as markers of initiation, symbols of a passage that few could endure. What once felt like curse now reveals itself as calling. The empath becomes healer, not because they chose suffering, but because they alchemized it. Pain has been transmuted into empathy. Wounds have become wisdom. Loss has become purpose. This is transcendence, not the escape from human pain, but the transformation of it. To carry scars without shame. To walk into another's suffering with compassion because you have known your own. To guide not with answers, but with presence. Jung believed that in our wounds we find our destiny. And for the empath, this destiny is clear: to embody resilience, to shine light for those still lost in shadow, to remind others that what feels like the end can, in truth, be the beginning. The narcissist once sought to destroy them. Instead, they have been remade. Scarred but awakened, they rise as the wounded healer, no longer defined by what was taken, but by what was found in the depths of suffering. And in this final stage, the empath's story is no longer one of survival. It is one of transcendence. Time does not erase the wounds. It transforms them. The empath, who once carried invisible scars like chains, now wears them as proof of survival. What once felt like shadows haunting every step has become the quiet reminder of everything endured and everything overcome. In the beginning, those wounds felt unbearable. Gaslighting, manipulation, the collapse of identity, all of it seemed like an ending. But now, looking back, the empath understands. It was not the end, but the passage, a descent that stripped away illusions, tore down false selves, and forced a confrontation with shadow. Sato. Pain was the teacher, suffering the initiation. Carl Jung taught that wholeness does not come from avoiding the darkness, but from embracing it. The empath's scars are not signs of weakness, but evidence of transformation. They are not reminders of what was taken, but of what was found. The strength to set boundaries, the courage to embrace shadow, the power to rise reborn. And here lies the deeper truth. This journey is not just personal. It is universal. Every human being, in some form, is called to confront their own shadow. Every soul must face collapse, loss, or betrayal that strips them bare. What defines us is not whether we suffer, but what we become because of it. The empath's journey, illuminated by Jung's wisdom, becomes a mirror for us all. It shows that wounds need not define us, but can refine us. That scars can carry beauty. That survival itself is a kind of transcendence. So as the story closes, the empath no longer walks with chains, but with markers of resilience. Their pain has become testimony. Their scars, wisdom. Their journey, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit has the power to rise. And in that rising, we see what Jung always knew. The path to wholeness begins not in light alone, but in the courage to face the shadow and to emerge transformed.